Conversations with the Past is our ongoing lecture series here at the Chapman. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Smell, and I am the Program and Outreach Coordinator here at the Chapman. I know some of you see some familiar faces. So tonight, our presenter is Mark. Yeah. Mark is the founder. Mark is the founder, editor, and publisher of the Glens Falls Chronicle, which was started in 1980 on a $1,700 investment. And the Chronicle circulates in the greater Glens Falls, Lake George region, encompassing Warren, Washington, and northern Saratoga counties. And now in its 44th year, very impressive, the Chronicle is still going strong. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I really appreciated the invitation from Rebecca to come and talk, particularly because it was a chance to get back to the Chronicle, beginnings of the Chronicle. And I think it's an amazing story because incredibly fortunate, so many things that happened along the way. There was no game plan that Mark Krause was going to start a newspaper. It was just things happened. And the first thing that happened was back when it was a Glens Falls Junior High School, not a middle school, but Glens Falls Junior High, right on Glen Street, which is now District 451.
425.
425.
I lived there.
It was junior high school, and in the back of the three buildings and in the basement was Miss McNulty's room. Miss McNulty was the history teacher, but she was the advisor for junior highlights. So I get to 7th grade, and that's the thing I sign up for, junior highlights. And all I was interested in was writing sports. You know, I read newspapers because I read about the Baltimore Orioles and the Baltimore Colts and the Baltimore Bullets. I was Baltimore thing. And so I signed up for junior highlights, and show you what junior highlights. Yeah. It was a fantastic newspaper. And it was not only were there stories in it, but we were selling ads. I wasn't, but there was an ad staff, and great ads like Merkel and Gelman had a really good looking ad now. And so I got the taste, and I'll pass this around. I'll tell you the interesting thing about this. When they closed the school and moved the middle school to Quaid Street, Jerry Cashin was a teacher at that point, I think it may have been a middle school already. He says, Mark, do you care about the history of junior highlights? I said, yes, I care about history. He said, come on over because they're about to throw the box of the archive into the dumpster. If you want it, come over and save it. So I went over, it's in our basement now. And so I have every issue. This was 1965. I'll pass it around. So Junior Highlights was a real newspaper. And what I learned from doing it was people really liked it. They really liked reading it. It was, the issue would come out and you'd see everybody reading Junior Highlights. One of the things that was the best in the paper was kind of the man on the street. We would ask students, again, it wasn't me, I was just doing sports. I was going to, but that question of asking a question and seeing what people said that you know, that was the origin of School Views, a feature that in the very first issue of the Chronicle in September 1980, we announced School Views. We were going to do a question of the issue for students, and they could respond. So we announced it in the first issue and printed the first answers in the second issue. And we've been publishing that from 1980 on. And now we know parents who, their kids are in it, the parents were in it, and even 3 generations, 44 years, that's a long time. And so people have grown up, and I love it when a kid will, when they're passing the rack and I'm refilling the Hannaford stores, a kid will say, here's the Chronicle. To get those kids reading it is a big deal. So that was kind of my roots, my upbringing. And Sandy, my wife, would talk about the Leave It to Beaver life that I lived growing up. And that really offended, it really offended me when she said that, because I was an Andy Griffith Show kid. I identified much more with Opie than I did with Beaver. And I like Beaver, but I identified with Opie. So I had this existence of doing this newspaper and being involved in the community, an excuse to talk to people. So one day, Miss McNulty says to me, Mark, the Glens Falls Times, which at that point was the afternoon daily, we had two papers, owned by the same company. She said, the Glens Falls Times is looking for a kid to cover things in the junior high school. Would you want to do that? I said, yeah, I love the sports. So I was covering freshman sports. And then I get to high school and Mr. Irving, who was the publisher, liked me and he said, you want to start covering the varsity games? I said, yeah. So first I was doing the Glens Falls home games. Then they started sending me the Glens Falls away games. And then they started sending me the games that didn't involve Glens Falls. So I was really coming right up the ladder and I just enjoyed it. Basketball, football, mainly were the two sports that we covered. So they say ink gets in your blood. That's what happened. I go away to law school and work for a newspaper in Baltimore Sun. I'm into like 1977, 78, and I'm not really sure where I'm going, what I'm doing. And come back to Glens Falls, the bicentennial summer of 76, when all sorts of things are going on. And I approached the Post-Star, I'd like to write a weekly column. And they say yes, and so I started writing this column, finish up law school. Even while I was in law school in Baltimore, I was still writing my weekly column in the Post-Star. Get out, graduate law school, come back, ask Mr. Davidson, who was the publisher, for a job. Said, we don't have any jobs. He said, I can get you an interview in Ohio. And that, I will admit, offended me because he wasn't from here and I was from here. He was introducing me away from my hometown. So I went over to WWSC, Chris Lentz, the radio station, and he hired me, gave me a 3-day-a-week job and gave me, most importantly, a 4-minute program at 7:15 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now, the way radio works, that is absolute prime time. You can't do any better. And in that era, that was pre-satellite radio. That was pre, almost anything. It was just radio. And as dominant as the Post-Star was, WWSC radio was equally dominant as the radio station. So at 7:15 in the morning, you were reaching people having breakfast, you were reaching farmers, you were reaching people on their way to school, you were reaching people wherever you were. Audience was huge. So I'm writing this column, I'm doing this commentary. I'm interviewing a woman named Tupper Lindbergh one day. Anybody know Tupper Lindbergh? Tupper is an original. And she said, it must have been for the Lake George Association, about the Lake George Association, because she was very active in the LJ. And she says to me, this is Tupper, if you know her, you'll realize this. Is this all you want to do with your life? And I said, well, no, I'd like to bring books in. Well, why don't you? I said, well, I don't have a publisher. She said, well, I know of a publisher in Rutland, Tuttle Publishing in Rutland. And Tuttle's an old Lake George name. So I drive up to Rutland on her say-so, and I get to the publisher. It's in a house, two very nice ladies. Tuttle publishes 2 books, at that point, 1978, 2 books a year, and they're both about Japan. Their whole focus is Japan. So what I want to do is bring out my best Post-Star columns and my best WWSC commentaries. So they said, I'm like out of luck. I'm just going to turn around and go home. Well, there is a printer here in Rome whose name is Bob Sharp. And they tell me how to get there. I go into Bob Sharp's printing building, brick building. It is like quintessential old New England. His whole attitude, the wood floors, the whole way the place operated, incredible. So he said, what can I help you with? And I said, well, I'm looking to bring out a book of my newspaper columns and my radio commentaries. He said, okay. And I said, I don't even think we talked about money at that point. He said, send me one of the columns and let me look at it and then we'll talk. So I sent him a column about how my parents met in Baltimore. While there was some Hudson Falls, my mother's. And sent it to him. It was my best friend. And he calls me up. He said, okay. And I said, well, my problem is I don't have any money. And he said, that's all right. You'll pay me when it sells. Well, if you know anything about the book publishing, they say the best way to make a small fortune in book publishing, start with a large fortune. You know, books don't sell, very seldom. But Chris, I was still doing my radio time. And Chris let me have a 30-second commercial right after my commentary. And my friend Nadine McPhillips was doing my commercials. And I arranged for 4 stores to sell the book when the book came out. Russell and Waite, which, you know, that's not long gone. Pendertoli in Hudson Falls, which at that point was a dominant store, women's clothing store. Poor Richards, which was a short-lived bookstore on Warren Street. And then the Joy Store, you know, which was the juggernaut. And I went to each of them and I said, I didn't know the people who operated the stores. I just approached them. I have a book. I'd like to offer you 20% of the sales. I'd like to come in and sell my book and autograph my book. The book came out on December 17th. So I was looking to sell books from December 17th to the 24th. 700 books in the first print. So they all said yes, and Penn said, keep the 20%. We don't want the 20%. Just so I was at Russell and Waite from 9 to 11. I was at Poor Richards from 1 to 2. I was at Penn from 3 to 5, and I was at the Joy Store from 6 to 10. And went in the first morning at Russell and Waite. They're lined up the length of the store, and this is the message that my talk I really want to give out is. The Chronicle is the community's paper. It exists, it survives, it succeeds because it's built from the bottom up. People were boosting me. They were, you know, they were just, whatever you do, we'll support you. Screw up and we'll still support you. Because I did a lot of screwing up too. But so by December 24th, they're gone. The 700 books are gone. Every single one autographed by me. You know, that they, and you'll see them on eBay. They really haven't appreciated a great deal. But I thought to myself, boy, if they're going to buy, the paperback was $5.50, the hardcover was $8.90. If they're going to buy a book for $5.50, maybe they'll buy a newspaper for, at that point, 35 cents is what I had. Scattered frost. And so I put an ad in the Post-Star. I didn't want the Post-Star to know. So I put a cryptic ad in classifieds. Mark Frost is looking for one smart cookie to help him. That was all it said. And I got about 20 applicants. Interviewed 6 or 7, and 2 of the people, Joyce Miller and Teresa Hackett, started the paper with me. And not only started the paper with me, stayed with the paper. And we were hand to mouth with this thing. It was not, I have here, you know, I dug out today. I have an envelope, September 1980, charter subscribers, nice letters. And people were sending money in for subscriptions when we didn't know if the next issue was going to. I mean, it was that kind of desperate. We started with $1,700. My rent was $100 a month. I had 3 employees that I paid $100 a week, and the printing bill was like $400. We were publishing every 2 weeks, so it was nip and tuck. But these people from day one, dear Mark, this is Mrs. James Yates. This is not somebody I knew. We appreciated the notice in the Chronicle. Enclosed is a check for $10 from the Good Fellowship Club to pay for it or use it in any way to further your success. I'm also enclosing our check for a subscription to the Chronicle. Sincerely, Charlotte. And John, the Sebagaibi, John Seamus from Sebagaibi, please enter a subscription to the Chronicle to Mr. John Seamus. You know, the pigment plant, Swiss owned. And I got to know him very well. And I said to him, why do I get entree to you? Why are you so willing to talk to me? It just surprised me. And he said, the questions you asked me today are the questions other people will ask me next year. So I like to find out early. So, which was, I mean, great tribute. Now he's probably playing me a little. This is Marjorie Nielsen, 64 Main Street, Hudson Falls. Dear Mark, please send your delightful paper to Mrs. Wellington McDougal, River Street, Hudson Falls. I mean, one after another. Ann Deerstein, my classmate from Glens Falls, lived in Boston, outside of Boston, Danvers. Here's my check for $10. What about postage? Let me know if you need more. There was a column in the Postcard called The Adirondack Sportsman by Bill Roden, an outdoors column. Mark, good luck. You're a brave man to undertake such a project in Depression times. Here's my $10 for a subscription, send to above address. Just one after another. So, and I mean, this is from day one. We just announced the paper, put a form and published first issue, and they're cutting out. And some people say, I don't want to cut the issue, but here's the $10, you know, and try that. But we still, as much as we had this support base, obviously there's a ton of people who don't know that we exist, you know, and we had no money. You know, Walmart comes in, Target, they have a parade practically. We were just winning people over one at a time. So one of the things that I did, this was the heyday of the Glens Falls Civic Center. So everybody went to the Adirondack Red Wing games. So I went to the Adirondack Red Wing games and started hawking papers. Chronicle, get your Chronicle. And the paper was 35 cents, and this would be filled with change. This was not my original apron. This was a second apron. The original apron that my father provided. One day in front of the Civic Center, Mike Woodbury, owner of Woodbury Lumber, comes by and said, we want to see you in a Woodbury lumber apron. And stupidly, I know I should have said, well, I'll wear a Woodbury lumber apron, but you have to advertise in my newspaper. I wasn't smart enough to realize that. And in fact, I'll tell you, a reason why the Chronicle switched from paid to free in 86, 87, we just couldn't, we were subsisting, you know, we were alive, but we weren't making any money. And I went in to see Jim Urch, who was the advertising director of Woodbury Lumber. And I said, Jim, how come you won't advertise? Circulation. And we were selling 5,000 papers. Now, papers would, the Post-Star would love to be selling 5,000 papers. 5,000 was a big number. At that point, it was 50 cents a copy. I said, what would it take for you to advertise this? And he said, 15,000. If you had 15,000, I would run some. So we made the decision to go free. And it wasn't just because there were other reasons, but we made the decision to go free. So we were going to lose that revenue. We were selling 5,000 papers at 50 cents a piece. Our share was 40 cents. So we were getting $2,000 of revenue from sale of paper. We were going to give that up. We're going to give up $100,000 a year of revenue. Plus, instead of printing 5,000 papers, we started printing 15,000 papers. And it's not triple the cost because once the press is running, it's less expensive, you know, for the additional copy, but it's still a substantial expense. So what it was like was jumping out of an airplane and hoping to parachute. And for a year, we lost $1,000 a week. We lost $50,000, and we didn't have it. So what I was doing was borrowing from people, you know, and actually sold some shares in the business. And the only people I was willing to sell the shares to were my friends, because I could tell them, you know, you may lose this whole thing. I had strangers call me and wanted to invest, and I couldn't take their money because, you know, they didn't realize just how risky this thing was. So it took a year, and then the parachute. All of a sudden, the increase in advertising sales more than made up for the increase in cost and the decline in revenue. And that actually, you know, we debate this in our house. I met Sandy in 1987. And coincidentally, the Chronicle became profitable very soon after we met. And he said, it's because of her. She finally instilled some discipline in the operation, but I think it's because the parachute opened. Not to say she didn't, and she's still making a difference with the paper, but it was a function of getting enough people to know the paper, think well of the paper, and we, in hindsight, I didn't understand this until probably the 15th year. We had to win people over one at a time. We had to win advertising one at a time. So we would write a story and somebody would say, that was fair. That was always what we were shooting, that it was fair. You may not agree with it, but it was fair. And advertisers, M. Lewis had a supermarket in Hudson Falls, Lewis Super. I went down there, had to be 3 years. I would go down there like every few weeks. I thought he was the perfect advertiser for the Chronicle. And we would have great conversations. He's hilarious. He was hilarious. It was all good, but he never advertised. So, you know, again, those are ones that I'm identifying with, and I think they're the ones who should be in the paper. Finally, out of the blue, he calls me up. He said, Mark, come down and see. I go down and said, I'm going to try advertising. So all I can think of is the poster must have done. He was totally postcard. So they must have done something that irked him. But he said to me, Mark, I got to tell you, I'm willing to try it, but if it doesn't work, I can't keep doing it. And I said, M, if it doesn't work, I don't want you. I mean, I'm sincere in wanting, but I said, will you give me a chance to do an ad the way I would like to advertise? He said, what do you mean? I said, we'll put prices and items, but I want to feature a customer. And he said, no. I said, why? He said, because nobody will do it. Nobody's going to want to be the Lewis Super Customer of the Week. And I said, you don't have anything, you don't have to do it. I will go into the store and approach customers and ask them, would you be willing to be the Customer of the Week? So we run the ad. I should have brought one. Run the ad for first time for Customer of the Week. He called me on the phone and said, keep doing Customer of the Week. And that's, you know, probably what, 5, 6, 7 years. That was it. They were page 3. Where Mohans is now was Lewis Super in those early years. And that kind of thing was being repeated enough that we had a shot at making this thing go. Now, there are a couple things that I meant to show you. When I first of all, with gathered frost, when we brought part of the Chronicle's success is that people wanted to get involved. They wanted to contribute to it. And particularly artists had a lot of Russell Sirianni and Tim Cordell and Bill Gates and John Kennison. Everybody wanted, in fact, Bill Donahue's daughter, Kelly, was Mark Mulholland's wife, who died very early of cancer. That was, I was often in that house. And Bill Donahue did the Inside Scoop logo, the 2 ice cream cones. Is it? I think it's 2, isn't it? Or is it 1? Maybe it's 1. Or 1 ice cream cone with 2 scoops. Anyway, that was Bill. Well, this was my friend Russell Sirianni. And when we brought out Scattered Frost, it wasn't like I was saying, Russell, could you make me a poster? Russell just did it. You know, one day he was a silkscreen printer, Sarah Graphics on Sanford, then on Sanford Street. And the first time the Chronicle comes out, the Joy Store calls me and says, come autograph the newspaper. Come autograph the first issue of it. This is the sign that greeted me at the Joy Store. So they had, I think it was Charles Cornell who made it. This is what greeted me. That was like so far above and beyond. So you had these grassroots people wanting the thing to succeed. They just kind of naturally wanted to help it. And that kind of thing just kept happening. It's still happening today. But back then, it was amazing. So what we got into a fight for when the paper was still paid was position in the store. We had to be visible at what they call the point of purchase. So at that point, what is now Aldi was the Grand Union. Originally, it was Albany Public Market, then it became the Grand Union. Karen Roselle, who became Karen Sullivan, was the manager. They had a flat stainless steel part before the conveyor. Just absolutely flat. I said, Karen, can I put the Chronicle, can I stack the Chronicle there on each conveyor belt? And Karen said, sure. Now, corporate didn't know that she was doing it. We went from selling like 25 papers a week in the Grand Union to 300 papers a week. So I said, this is good. Let's create a top 10 that we list every issue. Here are our top 10 outlets. So hopefully they will buy to be, so the Joy Store moves us to their checkout. They're selling 500 copies of it. And then on a smaller scale, you know, even if it was, well, Barden's at that point, what is now Bean's Country Store, Ben Barden gave me fantastic position. And I had gotten to know a lot of these stores from doing Scattered Frost. On the second printing of Scattered Frost, I approached all these stores. Ben, would you sell my book? Ron Williamson, Danny Gwynn, all the ones up on Route 9L in Fort Anne. Paul Crumley had a pharmacy. Fort Anne still had a pharmacy. And he answered his phone, Fort Anne's leading pharmacy, you know, obviously the only pharmacy. That's where I got. And from that, I called the Chronicle Northern New York's leading newspaper. That I got it from Paul Crumley. Went up to Whitehall. Fra and Cheryl Putorti had a growth. In fact, their son just ran for Congress the last election. But Fra and Cheryl, yeah, we'll sell your book. So when I started the Chronicle, everybody was like ready and eager to sell the newspaper. That's the way this thing is built from the bottom up. But it wasn't all, as my hockey writer Larry Halloran once wrote, it wasn't all singing birds and cherry pie. 1981, hard winter in 1981, we were above what is now Domino's Pizza in a little half room. I mean, it didn't go all the way to the front of the building. It was just the back, very cramped, exposed pipes. And the building was owned by my friend Nick Burke, who had Barber's Market. And in 1980, I was desperate to start the paper when I was still 29. I didn't want to turn 30 because I felt like I'd wasted my time. So I was going to turn 30 in December. So I needed to start the paper ideally right away. So I looked at, this is before Glens Falls downtown had hit bottom. They wanted thousands of dollars for a month for first floor space. And so I went to Nick and I said, somebody says you have space, and what was the grade in the chat? I think the musical notes can still be seen in the facade. And he said, well, I have a space, but I'm not going to rent it. I said, Nick, he said, it's not a habitable space. You know, I can't put you in there because it's not a habitable space. And I said, look, I'm desperate. He said, okay, you can take it. I'll charge you $100 a month. And I won't raise the rent for as long as I own the building. But any improvements you have to make. There was no toilet, there's no plumbing, there's no heat, there's no electric. It was just an in-between space. So we started, first we learned the hard way. Kerosene heaters are illegal in Glens Falls. But that was the first thing that we tried. And then we retreated to first my father's dental office on the weekends where there was heat. And ultimately we set up our typesetter in my parents' basement. Terry Hackett became the daughter my parents had never had. So it was like, again, a hand-to-mouth thing. But we were in there for over 6 years for $100 a month on a handshake. No written lease at all. So Nick also bought Pilot Knob Marine, he and Mike Smith. So when the time came, we decided to buy a boat. Where did we go to buy a boat? We went to Pilot Knob Marina, and our boat is still at Pilot Knob Marina, although Nick and Mike sold it 2 years ago. But again, all these ways in which it was this grassroots thing. So we get to February of that first winter, we're out of hope, we're out of money. We're kind of dead. It's done. We bring out the Valentine's issue and then we stop. And what I think I told the readers is, we're going to try to figure this out. I remember Joyce sitting at her desk, and I didn't have a clue. But then these miraculous things began to happen. Number one, we were approached by a printer in Boston Spa, who, what was killing us wasn't the printing of it, it was the typesetting, which was being done at Glens Falls Printing, George Fireback, and Guide Printing, which was in the old Post Star building on Park Street. And I mean, they weren't gouging us, it's just typesetting was expensive. You know, there was a lot of time. So this man in Boston Spa, the Saratogian wrote an article, so a very sympathetic article about us. He read that article, he approached us, he said, I will typeset and print your paper for one price. And the price was like $1,000 less than what we were paying for the two things combined. It was unbelievable. It was too good to be true. It turned out it was too good to be true, because the first issue, the first day we're waiting to deliver the paper at 7 a.m. It's supposed to, I didn't call. 8 a.m. I called down. Oh, it's just coming off the press now. 9 a.m. 10 a.m. The paper's still not there. I drive to Boston Spa. It hasn't even gone on this guy. He was just incompetent. It wasn't that he didn't want to do it, but he just ran a terrible business. That was a long 6-12 weeks. But in any event, those weeks enabled us to get going. So he approached us, and we had a deal that financially made it happen. 2 people applied. We had stopped the paper. Patricia Maddox, who worked for the North Creek Weekly, Corwin Skinner, who was from Fort Anne but was living in Rochester working for an advertising agency, but wanted to come back. They both applied. It was like, so I already had Joyce and Teresa, who were great, but they were totally inexperienced in the business. Patricia and Corwin was an artist. He knew the business. So that happened. And then I had to refund money to all these stores that had unsold products. You know, I would go in, and if they bought 10 papers, they paid that, there was still 35 cents. They would pay me $2.80. Okay. But if they had, and then the next issue would come out, and I didn't have to refund money. I would just give them the new issue. But now we didn't know if there was. That was the lowest day of my life up to that point. And I remember my mother went with me for moral support. So I was going to spend the day going to all these stores to refund the money and tell them we're out of business. So we go up to Chestertown, and at that point, the bus station in Chestertown was the pharmacy. It became Main Street Ice Cream Parlor, about that later, the Moffats. And we go in there, and he had like 4 papers, $3.12. That I was going to give him. He said, "When's the next issue?" And I said, "Well, no." He said, "Well, I'm just wondering when the next one is." Every stop along the way, that was the question. It was never, is there going to be another issue? When's the next issue? And by the end of it, I turned to my mother and said, "We're starting the paper." So those 3 things, and the 4th thing was somebody came up and with $10,000 and said, "I'll lend you $10,000." So all those things had to happen simultaneously for the paper to resume, and mid-April, the paper resumed. And as I say, paid, it was 35 cents, then it became 50 cents, then it became free. And it was, all the time I was telling him in the inside scoop, here's what's going on. I was leveling. I wanted him to know what we were going through. And all that stuff made them more and more supportive. And when I say there were times that I screwed up, we break a story that a new bar is going to open in downtown Glens Falls called Bullpen. And Dave Krogman and Paul Perpetual, wow, this is big. The city court judge and the Glens Falls High School football coach are opening a bar. And we put that in the paper. Well, it wasn't them. It was their son. And that could have been an absolutely terrible moment, and they took it, you know, with great humor. So when we screwed up, when we made mistakes, whatever, they just identified with it more. And that grassroots origin of it is the strength of the paper. It was always readers first. Think about the readers first. We care about the advertisers, but give them great content. Give them honest content, treat them with respect. And it still goes back to Glens Falls Junior Highlights. In my mind, it's still the same motivation that it was at the beginning. And frankly, I think a lot of newspapers have gotten away from the grassroots aspect of that interconnection with the readership and respect for the readership. And I mean, I consider ourselves incredibly fortunate, and I'll knock on wood because who knows? The newspaper business is in tremendous decline, but I can tell you, we're having a good year. And our moment, our existential moment was March of 2020 when COVID struck. And I realized, whoa, most of our advertisers are closed. You know, they're not going to be, Tammy is not going to run her hair design ad with me, you know, when she can't even be in her shop. So that was a moment at which we had to decide, you know, and I was kind of at retirement age and what a lot of people would regard as that. So we had a decision to make, and I thought about it, and I still wanted to do it. Kathy still wanted to do it. Sandy still wanted to do it. And my staff still wanted to do it. But all that said, I had prided myself since 1980. Since year one, I had never laid in. And now we're in our 39th year, about to turn 40. And on March, and I think it was March 20th, maybe 18th, I laid off 7 people. You know, but I realized Sandy was stunned at how fast I did that. March is a terrible money because Christmas has all been collected, long since collected. Our season starts at Mother's Day. That's when things turn, more restaurants open, there's more spending. From, it's not January to Valentine's Day is okay, but February to mid-April, those are the dicey months. So we were able to, we were back in survival. I felt like I was in 1980. We had, what, 5 people working, and we had 17 before. So that's how drastic it was. But it was kind of elemental because I was back to just survive. Don't think about initiatives. Don't think about the things that you, big projects that you want to take on. It was, let's survive, pay the bills. And what we realized, the readers valued it even more. The readers needed the Chronicle. I always used to tell the staff, even before the decline of the papers, we're essential or we're unnecessary. Increasingly, that's how the world economy is. You're essential or you're unnecessary, and they'll lop you off the second they deem you unnecessary. So how can a little weekly paper become essential to where they feel they have to have it? And there's, turns out there's a lot of different things. The calendar, they like the calendar. They like the school views. They like the news coverage. They like the April Fools. They really and there's all these things where they like identifying with a locally owned small business. You know, a pizza shop becomes essential. Cookies becomes essential. You know, different businesses have to figure out. And I felt like we were early on understanding that we had to become essential, and we're working every day to try to become even more essential to more people. And now Xander's on the social media. I mean, we're humming on social media, Facebook. And so I think that a lot of people deem us more essential now than even they did back then, for fear of losing it. That they'll knock themselves out. So it's that, this is a real thing, and it's storybook in its way. And some people would say, well, this is a puffery, you know, it's not real. I think in our case, it is real. and we are what we purport to be. And people are surprised sometimes to find out how hard we're willing to work to, to try to do the job right when you're exhausted. Now, I was in the paper, I was there until a little after midnight last night, and still trying to do a great issue. We never take it for granted. And I still deliver papers myself. I'll be there at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Favorite part of the job. If I retire, I want to be a delivery driver. And the driving or the delivery, you come face to face with the readers, and you find out what they like. Sometimes you find out what they don't like. And all through, I had such amazing experiences. There was a little store in West Fort Anne called Chase's Store, right on 149. John Aspen bought it and operated it for a while. But back when it was Chase's Store, I used to deliver to that outlet. He would sell like 3 papers. And so I walk in there. Ben Camp was the guy who owned it at that point. He says to me, as dry and crusty as a person could be, he says to me, "You got any local news in that paper this week?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I have a Fort Anne story this week." I was all excited. He said, "You got any West Fort Anne news?" And that was another factor in going free. I said, I can't get West Hebron and North Hebron. And I said, let's go free. Maybe they'll be a little easier on me when it comes to, what their expectation is. So you have to learn, always learn, no matter what happens. You got to be paying attention, and the feedback is plenty and abundant. They love to tell you what they think, and if you listen to them, you can recalibrate what you're doing. I think it's the same paper that it was, but it's also a different paper that has just kept adjusting with the times. And I think it's still a viable business, and I think newspapers can be a viable business. And again, I think you got to build it from the grassroots up and never forget about that. But you see sports, what they've done at now the Cool Arena, what that hockey team has done is incredible. In this economy, they're selling out those hockey games. And who was it who made the point to me? Oh, was it the bank president, right? Who said in 1980, in the 1980s, when the Civic Center was really in its heyday with the Adirondack Red Wings, we had a lot of corporations who were buying big blocks of tickets. There was a lot, back then, Continental Insurance and Kmere and Siva Geigy and Sandy Hill, so many locally owned companies, or at least if not locally owned, very rooted in the community, were buying these big blocks. Most of those companies are either gone or no longer locally owned, other than Glens Falls National Bank. And now they have to sell them one ticket at a time, or more appropriately, one family. And you see the kids going in, and that's just amazing that on a regular basis, they can get 4,000 or 5,000 people coming to that. So it can be done. And, when I mentioned Carl Davidson wanted to introduce me away to Ohio, I believe in Glens Falls. And as I know everybody in this room, that's what drives this community that overachieves, has more than a city this size should have. And, smallest city with a paid symphony orchestra, to have the Wood Theater, to have, the Hyde Collection, to have the Chapel Museum, to have so many things. And in one way, I do get scared because we're losing those big employers, but it's also an entrepreneurial community. The two things that I say define Glens Falls are enterprise and philanthropy. Think Henry Kramer. Starts from nothing. I mean, literally. And, as a lawyer, and ends up amassing a fortune, gives the city, establishes the library, gives it to the city, establishes a park, gives it to the city, creates the Boys Savings Fund, and limited to 100 kids ages 12 to 16 at any given time. They join, he starts them with $25. They have to save $12.50, earn $12.50 on their own. And if they do that, he rounds it up to $100. Now we're talking the beginning of the 20th century. Leaves his estate with instructions, use the money to do the most good for the most people. It still exists. The Crandall Trust still exists. My wife is the president of the Trust. But it's still funding a lot of the library. It still owns City Park. Owns the, I think, does it own the land under the library? But it's still here. Charlie Wood, you know, starts with nothing, and but a phenomenal personality. And he told me, when he started out, he was in Squash and Lockport. And kind of, he wasn't an engineer, but he did something in building airplanes during World War II. Sees ads in the Wall Street Journal for business opportunities this way. Ends up in Scroon Lake. And one of my favorite stories, which I'll tell you the story and then I'll tell you how they excuse. There's a guy named Ed Louie who created a PR firm in Albany that still exists, although Ed has passed away, Ed Louie Associates. Ed Louie started out as an advertising salesman for the Times. Charlie Wood is looking to open his first business, a resort in Scroon Lake. He is in the ground digging to put a septic tank when Ed Louie arrives in a suit trying to sell him that. Charlie says, "You get down in this hole, help me dig this hole, I will buy an ad." Now, Ed Louie swore to me after that, "I did not do that. That is not a true story." Charlie insisted it was a true story, but Charlie became Ed Louie's first client when he opened up his PR and was with Charlie the whole time that he owned the great estate. So, but Charlie, you know, I said, I made my money here. I want my money to help people here. Very committed to Glens Falls and Lake George. And I was involved in the founding of the Wood Theater. And I can tell you, Charlie did not ask to have that theater named after him. I mean, he did not. That was our push. He gave us the first $250,000 for the theater. Then he gave us a $250,000 challenge. If we could raise another $250,000, he'd give us $250,000 more. I think he gave us another $500,000. And he was smitten with it, you know. Because he was showbiz anyway. And I went up looking for him once when it was he still owned the estate. And I said to him, "Man, you know, where do I find Charlie?" And he said, "You see that kid over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Go tell that kid to sit down on the job." Charlie went. You know, and then they love telling them stories. And I'm taking pictures of Charlie. I did a lot of art. And I'm taking pictures of Charlie, and every one he's got this big smile on his face. I said, "Charlie, I'd like to get something different, a different one. Can you not smile?" He said, "Mark, I am in the business of making people happy. I only smile." And, you know, he understood that, but he also understood his heart was real. And when he started the Hole in the Woods camp, bought Hidden Valley Ranch, and Paul Newman, wanted to enlist Paul Newman. And he couldn't get Paul Newman to come and look at the property, and just kept pushing and pushing. He and Josie earned Tiffany's one day, and the public or whatever their speaker system says, "Charles Wood, Paul Newman would like to speak to you." And somebody in his office, Paul Newman had called, took the call at Tiffany's, and Paul Newman agreed to come up and look at the place. And at first, Paul didn't immediately say yes, but Charlie said, "Paul, I don't have as much money as you. I'm not as famous as you, but I got a heart that's every bit as big as yours is. And I'm going to do this, and I need you to help me do it." And according to Charlie, I was not there. According to Charlie, Paul Newman said, "How much do you want?" I said, "I want $1 million." you got it, let's eat. And that was the beginning of the relationship. And to meet people like this, and Dick Kuroda, who was the CEO of Finch Prime, and I was in that office a lot. And this is a guy who dropped out of the University of Miami, came back to Glens Falls and was sweeping out boxcars that they were filling with paper. That was his initial job at Finch Prime. And the big thing was the old man, Mr. Beam, sent him to operate the pulp. They could not get this continuous digester that came here to operate efficiently. And Mr. Beeman put it on Dick Kuroda, go in there and make that thing work. And he took a crew of people in there with him, and eventually they made it up. And it was key, remains key to their operation, their viability, is this continuous digester. And so he just kept rising in it. And I would sit in his office and he would tell me, he said, you know, Mark, the salesmen call me up and they want to talk to me and they want me to buy this, they want me to buy that. And you know what I tell them? I said, what do you tell them? Put it down on paper. I make paper, Mark. And if we're going to have a deal with me, they've got to put it down there. And he said, and I'll hold it up. I have a photo of it. Look at the opaqueness of this paper. And I realized talking to him that he knew more about the manufacture of paper conceivably than anybody in the world. You know, that they were doing, it was elemental. And I love the mill, you know, I love the log trucks. I love that that's still there. And we lucked out there that when the Prime family sold it, the people who bought it were sincere about, we want to continue the mill. You know, look at the ones we've lost, but that one is still operating. So those original TV data, Jim West and Ted Zoli created the TV listing business. The computerized TV listing business was created in Glens Falls. Any newspaper that was running TV listings came out of here. And there's still, the business is still going on, even with it being remote. It can be remote. Nobody's working in their building anymore, but there's still people in Glens Falls doing that work. Entrepreneurship, and then a turnaround where you give money back. Phil Morse, you know, lucky for us, he's from Boston, goes to University of Maine, meets Sue Keene from Glens Falls. Phil said to me, I went to college in Maine because I just wanted to play baseball. It was about the baseball. But she said, let's move to Glens Falls. Let's come to Glens Falls. Brings him back to Glens Falls. He goes to work for what is now BD, Becton Dickinson. It was US Capital at that point, later became Bard. They made a device used during heart surgery. And Phil Morse, as a salesman, he's just a salesman. As a salesman, he would sometimes go and watch the heart surgery because he wanted to see the device in action. And he sees it and it fails during the surgery. He sees the device fail, which happens. But at the end, and then you know they didn't lose the patient. They had a fallback. But he goes down and says, I want to take that device. He studies the device and he sees a better way to make it. So he comes back and he goes to management, whoever that was, and says, you know the story.
Yes, I do.
He goes and says, I see a better way to do this. We can do this device. They told him no. He quit and he went to manufacture into the Colvin building initially to create this device known as the Morse manifold, used during heart surgery. And I mean, lean years while he was doing that, but created a public company, you know, hugely successful. When he sold it to Pfizer, his share of he owned over half the company, 85 million. And at that point, it happened that the Boston Red Sox were for sale. And he got approached by two different groups. They knew he was a baseball fan. I mean, fanatic Boston Red Sox. And got approached by two different groups, both of whom he took to the Montcalm restaurant at different times as they wined and dined and tried to go in. And he ended up going with John Henry, and he is an owner of the Red Sox today. But again, gave us the fields that Glens Falls schools played on Sherman Avenue. So that commitment to make your money, be entrepreneurial, make things happen. Northern New York, you have to do that. There's nothing easy. It's not a big enough market. You gotta create your. You can't just cater to a market. You have to create them. And then as time goes on, share the wealth. Pitch in on civic commitments, civic achievements, and that's really an ethic here. It's not smoke and mirrors. And somebody said to me, I'm not going to say who it is, but an economic development, not here now. He said to me, well, the problem with Glens Falls is there's no entrepreneurial tradition. And I mean, stuff like that, I just, my head exploded. So there is that entrepreneurial tradition. There is that civic tradition. And I hope that Glens Falls is part of it, or that the Chronicle is part of it. I think I want to be like Stewart's, which I think is a great company. And we deliver the Chronicle to a lot of stewards. And I love the pulse of stewardships. I'm doing the Washington County group tomorrow, and I'll be in like 10 different steward shops. And I just love going into them. I love the people that I talk to there. It's like real people, and they are the same thing, putting money back into the community. So we still have hope. I worry that we're losing industry. There's still a pushing on, and I hope that the Chronicle